Is it time to dismantle some doctrines? If you don't know what that means, then come along with me. I'm Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Bible college teacher and pastor of more than 20 years. Join me as we deconstruct whatever dogmas and beliefs have held you behind, and together work to reconstruct and rebuild your authentic self. I am super happy to be reconnecting with my very good friend Stacie Rae all the way from Canada. It's been way too long, Stacie, so welcome back to the Dismantling Doctrine podcast.
You have a new title since I was on the show last time, actually.
That's true. It used to be the Mindship podcast. I changed the name a couple of years ago because I felt like it wasn't reflective of what I'm trying to accomplish. So yeah, you're one of the guests that's been on the newly named show. But yeah, we met up in Canada. I mean, what you were just saying before we hit record, how long ago was it? 2018?
Yes, it was at the very tail end. It was like September, October, I think.
Yep.
I don't remember.
Something like that. My sister Valerie and I drove up from Seattle. A bunch of us met in Vancouver. That was such a great day because we all met at a pub. We had a good lunchtime, a great meeting, and we finally got to meet in person. I met Janice Selvey and her friend as well. So what a great gathering. A bunch of atheists and agnostics and all that hanging out. And Neil 604, the atheist, was there. So yeah, it was great.
I'm not an atheist. I'm more of a heretic. Let's get it straight, okay?
Okay, we'll set the record straight. So what have you been doing since then? Because, there was the other thing. We did a live podcast. You're the only person I've ever done a live podcast with. So I don't know if that's a dubious honor. No, that's a great honor. That was such a great day.
I did.
When you came down. Yeah, you're the only person I've ever, in person, that is. I've done stuff on YouTube and all that, but you are the only person that I've actually conducted a live podcast with in the flesh. So yeah, you have another honor as well.
Oh, I didn't know that. That was crazy because I was just at the beginning of like a complete life change, and I drove down to Seattle with these women that I had never met. I didn't know anything about them, and I was just in like full shock mode. Like my life was just falling apart, and I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna. I honestly, Clint, I don't remember a lot about that day.
It was a great day. I remember it. It was really good. That podcast was so good.
I've listened to it. I'm like, that sounds like me. Yeah. But I don't remember all the depths.
You sure that was Stacie Rae? Yeah, but
it really affects you. So yeah, and we'll talk about that today.
Oh yeah. Well, and I was gonna say, going back to that live podcast we did it at my friend Big Steve's house, which was just south of Seattle. And I remember we talked a lot on Facebook calls before I flew over to the States. You came down from Canada, and we talked about, okay, what are we gonna say? What are we gonna do on this podcast? And I remember you said something that really did change my life. I'm not sure if I ever told you this, but you said, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about deconstructing our beliefs. And, everyone talks about that because we're coming out of the evangelical community and all that. And you said, let's talk about reconstructing. Let's talk about rebuilding after you've deconstructed. And that's really become a major sort of life script for me. It really changed my life. I don't know if I ever told you that, but it really did.
I had no idea. It's kind of how I look at life. Like even with the things that I teach in my coaching, we could talk about these problems all day, but if you don't give me a solution, then I don't understand why we're here, right? So when you're a client in my office, this is to me the difference between people that are searching for answers and people that are looking to transform with answers in their hands, right? So when we were talking about that, I just remember thinking like, everybody's doing this. We're all, bitching and complaining. But how do we fix it? Where do we go? And I noticed that that's how a lot of your content has spun moving forward, as you're actually giving people tools.
Absolutely. So you can take credit for that, really, because it has changed my life script, because I realized I was part of a couple of online ex-evangelical communities on social media. And I was starting to realize, all these people, most of them, like you said, they just wanted to bitch and moan. And there is a legitimate reason for them to be angry. And I was angry too for a long time. I was in this rut of sort of despair and anger and everything else. But when we had that conversation, I thought, you know what? You're right. We need to focus on rebuilding and reconstructing. What can we salvage from the ashes, as it were, of our former religious life? And then I found, when I went back on some of these communities and started posting, hey, let's think about rebuilding, they turned on me. It was quite shocking. Yeah, I was not prepared for that.
I've totally experienced it. It's very weird because they wanted to stay in that, sort of it's very misaligned, I think, to growth and development, but they wanted to stay there. They weren't ready to heal. They needed somebody to throw the axe at.
Yeah, absolutely. They just wanted to wallow in the anger and the rage. And I think, yes, you have to work through that, but to stay in that something, I think Janice Selby, it's something like perseveration or something like that, where you just, it's like a record stuck, on this needle in the same groove going over and around and around and around. You're not actually moving anywhere. You're doing nothing, but it's actually destructive, isn't it? So what are you doing now? I mean, the last time we talked, you had just written a book. I see on the bookshelf behind you, you've got a new book, and I think you're working on another one now. You said, conveniently placed, a shameless plug.
Really play.
How did that get there?
Well, since you've seen me, yes, my first book was called The Resting Traveler into the Forest. It was a poetic allegory of essentially my deconstruction because I felt like I couldn't just come out and say all the things I really wanted to say. Like I carry an energy that's very nurturing and innocent, and I didn't know how to translate the truth of who I was to what I was feeling, which was really betrayed and angry. And this is an entire life of belief. Like I was born and cultured in evangelical Christianity. So I felt so many emotions. So my first book was really taking all of those emotions and doing what I do best, which is I'm an author. And so I wrote all of it out in story, which I kind of thought was interesting because biblically they're parables, right? So I wrote it out in story for people to then take what you want, take it how you want. But since then, kind of moved away from that. I worked through it, healed, and then I got into a couple situations with narcissism. And that led to the second book on the shelf, which is The Last Letter, Surviving a Narcissistic Relationship. And so the books that I have moving forward, they are on literally recovering the self. So I'm an identity coach and I help people take back the truth of who you are, just like through mentorship healing. And you realize that with narcissism, that's what gets stolen is your identity. And that's actually very similar to what I experienced in this evangelical religion. I think it's a cult. And I experienced literally narcissistic abuse.
And I think we talked a couple of months ago in preparation for getting this podcast together. And I mean, we do need to go there because the idea of this sort of narcissistic God, even that comes across in so much of evangelical Christianity. So yeah, in your life, in your coaching, what exactly do you do? So you're helping people. Are these people that come out of religion or they're coming out of broken narcissistic relationships? Who's your sort of target audience?
Well, I don't get a lot of religious sort of people looking for that. I think, to be honest, Clint, I think that you have a little bit of a newer approach to this concept. It's like a niche that you have. I actually get more people that are wounded through relational narcissism. They are struggling with purpose, recovery. So when someone walks into my space, it's because they have some sort of a boundary issue. So they lack boundaries. It's because they have some sort of relational issue. That could be family, actually coworkers, like bosses and such, as well as intimate relationships. So that's kind of where my focus is more relational in that regard.
Well, maybe we should get into it because I've been thinking a lot about this. What is the definition of a narcissist? And why are so many relationships narcissistic? Because you run a Facebook group, I'm a part of it. Something like coping with or surviving a narcissistic relationship. What is actually a narcissist? Can you define that for us? Because you hinted earlier. You said you had some experience in a narcissistic relationship. I don't know how much you want to disclose of that, but
Okay, so here's some challenges. So anyone you will interview regarding this, the challenges are that we don't want to be hit with like slander and defamation cases. So we're always very careful how we share. But essentially, narcissism is psychological and emotional abuse that's done through control and breaking down of somebody's personal identity, so their true self. And the victim ends up living a life for the narcissist more than themselves. So they give everything of themselves, all of their energy is poured outside of their personal reality into the reality of the narcissist.
So they're being controlled in a way. So there's that the narcissistic cult leader. I mean, that's the classic image, isn't it? The person who is charismatic or whatever. They're attractive to people. Obviously, they're attracting followers, attracting someone who's interested in what they have to say. But then they end up. It's an exploitive relationship, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the end, how are they actually? How do they do it? How do they get away with it? Because you think, why do people fall for it? Why do people fall for cults? Obviously.
Okay, that's like a loaded question. Um, okay, so this is a process. So intermittent reinforcement. So this is a consistent positive, negative response. It's going back and forth, back and forth. So in narcissistic relationships, we look at this through idealization and devaluation, which is like love bombing. So if you've ever heard that term, in cult leaders, they're projecting outwards this energy, this feeling that like their followers are feeling like they are on the pedestal. They are just perfect and adored. And so their followers are going to fall for this attraction to validation. So it's validating the followers' sense of wanting to belong, self-worth. So if you have people that come into a situation, so in relationships, you'll have one partner that's saying, like maybe they have really low self-esteem. And I'm saying maybe, but we're talking like 99.98%. Okay. Low self-esteem. And then a narcissistic personality comes around and goes, oh wow, I see one. Like you have a stamp right here that says like pick me.
Yeah, I'm a vulnerable person somehow.
Yes. Yeah.
They just zero home right in on it, don't they? They just know.
They can sense that there's something that they can exploit. And so then what they do is they start to mirror and mimic all the things that you're looking for. So in religion, what are people looking for? They're looking to belong. They're looking for community. And then it's, oh, well, we need you and we need to have your support here and your voice matters. And these are all beautiful things. And we really want people to have those sense of value and self. But when it comes to narcissism, they're going to use that exploitively, but also they're going to mimic any little aspect of that to get you hooked. So in relationships, it's like, have you ever, and maybe you've experienced it yourself, have you ever had someone you're like, we are just so perfect. This is like a twin flame situation. We are meant to be destiny. And it's very fast and it's very, exciting. Those are all indicators that something might be off because really things shouldn't be that perfect at the beginning. There should some sort of push pull, but with narcissism, and this is, I think, across the board, even in religious aspects, things are made to seem very lovely and wonderful, and you only meet on Sundays and you only meet at your Bible studies, and there's no conflict. Now, what happens when there's conflict? You have a problem. You're the problem.
So to blame somehow, victim blaming.
Yes. Were you the problem in your experiences if you brought up a concern?
Absolutely.
Was there any accountability by the leadership?
No, it was always my fault somehow, or, God was never to blame for sure.
No. And so like gaslighting is a massive part. So when you're asking me, why is it that people get hooked into that? There is a level of so when we say psychological and emotional abuse, it's because there's a level of psychological manipulation. That's the idealization, devaluation. So the mind is just going back and forth constantly. It doesn't know what to believe. And so that places the mind in a state that is very malleable. That's how the control is attached. Now, the emotional part is now we're activating dreams, beliefs. We feel the same. Then you have physical touch involved. So now we have chemical responses outside the body and inside the body. Like it's a whole body process.
Yeah, the whole package.
Yeah.
So how do you know if you're in a narcissistic relationship? I mean, obviously that's a hard question to answer. Someone who sort of awakens and says, my God, okay, I think this relationship's unhealthy. Maybe that's the starting point. I don't know, or abusive or something like that. When does a person sort of wake up and say, whoa, I think I'm, in a narcissistic relationship here?
Okay, so let's look at what is narcissism. So it's exploitation of others, and that's going to be through like essentially using tools that other people have for your own gain. There's not a lot of reciprocity in that. But it's also lack of empathy, so that's like dismissing or minimizing feelings, ignoring feelings, devaluing your feelings. Then there's entitlement. Narcissism has a lot of entitlement. And in Christianity, we see that because they are literally saying we are the only way. We deserve all of these things, and this is our stamp, and you're all wrong and we're right, right? Grandiosity, that's another big one of narcissism. So that's like exaggerating your achievements, your talents, your importance, and then you're going to add control. If you can see control tactics, that's a sign of narcissism. That's going to be coercion or gaslighting, all forms of manipulation. Then we've got things like the ego. So the narcissist has a false self. It's not a pure image. So if you see somebody that when their ego is under fire in any way, even with just like questions or gentle criticism, if their response is very aggressive or they react with rage or blame, that's another sign of narcissism. Devaluation. But I'm going to tell you the biggest one that I use as an indicator is consistency. So in everything you see, if it's inconsistent and it's going back and forth, that's a big red flag. Like that's my first one. So then that leads to, well, what isn't narcissism? Because sometimes people say, oh, that's so narcissistic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, confidence is not narcissistic. We are actually born to have self-confidence and to project that. That's like genuine self-assured, but it doesn't come by belittling others. Like I don't have to feel confident by saying you're retarded, right? But
Turn the other person down.
yeah, exactly. Ambition, leadership, having high standards, none of that's narcissistic. Having pride in yourself, that's not narcissistic. But again, what's the consistency in all this? And having healthy boundaries. In narcissism, those boundaries are always going to change. It's like the goalpost is always going to change. But having healthy boundaries, they're going to be firm. They're going to affirm protection of self without, again, hurting others. So that's kind of like some of the ways that you can understand if you're in a narcissistic relationship or if you're in some sort of narcissistic situation.
Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to get out, isn't it? Because I was just speaking to someone recently who's going through, I guess, a trial separation at the moment, but her partner is quite abusive emotionally, not physically, but there's a lot of issues there, and he's trying to control the situation, changing the locks on the house and all these things. Now it's going through all this sort of cycle. What do you say to a person like that? Because sitting there talking to her, it's like, I said, well, maybe you're in a narcissistic relationship. This sounds like all the classic hallmarks of a narcissist: control and manipulation, and everything will be fine if you come and live with me. I'm going to quit drinking, and all this kind of stuff. And it's all lies. It's all bullshit. It's just, I said, he'll say anything to get you back into the house, So it was an interesting conversation. But I was thinking about our upcoming podcast as I was speaking to this person I met, thinking, I wonder if this is the classic, hallmarks of a narcissistic relationship.
Right. So when promises are made like that, that's what we would consider future faking. And the agenda is to create a situation in the present that will establish the connection for the future. So there's something we call supply. So supply is essentially, what is it that the victim of narcissism is giving out to the narcissist? What are you supplying them with? That can be money, emotional support, a place to live. It could literally be that you've been the punching bag for their emotions. You're supplying them with something, okay? There's something that in that they are taking, the narcissist is taking to essentially build their belief system of self with. So if it's that you are a corporate, like a CEO, and you have like this really great job and you have a good name, the narcissist will use that to supply themselves to say, look at me, I'm a CEO. It's ridiculous. I know that doesn't sound like that makes sense, but that's what they do. So in that supply, by saying to your friend, by that man or woman saying, just come and live at the house. Just if you would just stop doing all of that and just come be with me, everything would be fine. That's them trying to start the train to say, I'm in control, and then I'm going to promise you a future in that. Listen, I've changed. I'm going to counseling. I'm not drinking. And then this is why I say there's the one key word, which is consistency. If that occurs for longer than 3 months as a minimum, and you see consistent change in terms of immediate as well as escalation of the change, so personal development that is consistent, then I don't think you're in a narcissistic state. Then I think you're in somebody who's maybe trying and struggling. But if it only lasts a moment and then it's back to devaluing, like that's how you know it's not a real illusion.
Yeah, everyone struggles with different demons and so forth, I suppose. But like you say, okay, that's a good hallmark or a good marker to say, okay, let's give it 3 months and see if there is a legitimate, consistent change in this person's vibe. Otherwise, it's just manipulation, isn't it?
Yes, and you don't tell them the time.
Yeah, don't give it a time frame.
No, because they'll do what they need to do. This is unfortunately a game. And now I feel to say, like, these people are not consciously trying to be assholes or like malevolent beings, right? Like they're not trying to do that. This is a mechanism and a way of life that they have learned out of their own survival patterns from formative years, like childhood. So they don't actually even know on a certain level, they don't even know that they're doing it. Yet at the same time, they do, but they can quickly talk themselves right out of that and bring themselves back into their own fantasy. It's quite an interesting psychological web, let's call it.
Yeah, no one sets out to say, I'm going to become a narcissist and this is what I'm going to control and manipulate others. Well, how does it relate to this concept of betrayal bonding? Because I've been going through a book with my sister, Valerie, on betrayal bonding. And it says, to me, it's this idea of somehow the victim in a relationship, let's say a narcissistic relationship, somehow bonds with his or her abuser. And then you can get into things like insane loyalty, where it's like you are uber loyal to the person who's actually abusing you. How does that relate? Does this relate to this whole concept of narcissism?
Well, okay, so that's the trauma bond.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to just pull up some notes here because in one of the books that I'm writing, it's called Releasing the Trauma Bond. I started to realize this is so much more than a bond. This is like a binding. And so before you like say, well, how does that happen? Okay, let's understand what it is. So a bond, I'll give you a couple footnotes here. So a bond is a relationship between people that's based on shared feelings, interests, or experiences. Okay, so that's one definition. It's a connection between two surfaces. So like if you were to glue like two pieces of wood together, and these bonds can be done even chemically. It can be an agreement that's done with legal force. But then a bind is different. That's like fastening, securing something tightly. That's very different than a bond. A bind is like I'm in a problematic solution, like a sticky situation.
Yeah, I'm in a bind, literally in a bind.
In a bind, right?
Yeah.
A bind can be like a book bind. So again, you've got a bunch of pages and you're binding them together. It can be contractual, again, like a legal enforcement. It can be the uniting of people together, like unity and community is binding. So a trauma bond, I realize this isn't just a bond. You're literally binding yourself and being bound with another person under these conditions of like force, conditions of like tightness, fastening to your partner. And then how do you get in that? Well, it all stems with one beginning thing, which is you as the survivor of narcissism, you're looking for somebody to validate you because you have your own core wounds. So you're looking for someone to say, I see you. Oh, you're amazing. Oh, wow, look at how special you are. Because we aren't giving that to ourselves. We're going outside of our body looking for that. And so the narcissist goes, oh, I can give that to you. Now, listen, it's temporary. That's in the fine print. I'm not going to tell you that. But yeah, I could give that to you. And then we're like, oh my God, I feel so special. Wow. He sees me and we're so perfect together. And then the illusion starts to fade. When it fades, that's when that bind comes in. Because now you're hooked. This is a fish on a hook. You bit that hook. You are invested because that person saw you and they promised you a future.
Yeah. They validated you and everything else. Yeah. All these wonderful positive things, seemingly.
So betrayal bonding, it goes even worse because now you're in a sense where you are realizing, hey, something's wrong. Like maybe you find out that your partner cheated on you. Now in church, the betrayal looks very different. That's maybe like, hey, I thought that I was going to be like taking care of that program. How come you suddenly gave it to this person? Well, this person has more education than you. Oh, so that's like, now I feel betrayed. Now I'm hurt. I'm wounded by people that I trusted. And so then what happens is now you talk yourself through it. It's mental gymnastics. You know what? It's probably my fault. I did that. So in relationships, if they cheat, it's maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to him. Maybe I just wasn't dressing sexy enough for him. Maybe I just didn't clean the house good enough. I really should apologize. That's pretty messed up.
Yeah, that's really messed up. Yeah, so you start to blame yourself for the other person's shortcomings, but somehow, well, how does this relate to this idea of insane loyalty? Because that's part of it, isn't it? It's like you're actually defending the abuser, defending the person who's hurting you to the point where you don't even see it. You're actually excusing their behavior, even though it's doing damage to us.
Because cognitive dissonance steps in where you are so attached to not just the abuser. So remember that your identity has left. You are living the identity of the narcissist. And in that, you don't have your own thoughts. So you're now in full protective mode and living out a life that's not your own. That means that if somebody is hurting them, you by default are saying that's hurting me. So one of the challenges that I have when a survivor comes to me for assistance is that at the beginning, we have to get through the tethering. So I have this 5-step, it's not really a program. It's kind of like a guidepost of how I can see relationships progressing after narcissistic breakups. So it's the shock of it all where you're just like totally like, what happened? This is the drug has left. You're like ready for a fix. You're jonesing hard. So that withdrawal, that shock, that's the biggest thing to get through. And this is where a lot of suicidal ideation happens. You've lost your connection. You've lost all the people attached to them. And you've lost the expected outcome that you had with that person. But then step 2 is the tethering. So I call this process stare. So we have shock and tethering. And the tethering step, that's the hardest part. Because now we're asking you to go no contact or low contact. We're asking you to start coming back into yourself and to leave that chemical dependency. We're asking you to start thinking about yourself more than them. And so this is where we will experience what you just said, that defense of the narcissist. Well, they didn't really mean it. Like, why are you speaking so harshly about them? And it's like to the outside world, we're like, dude, you just like black and blue. How are you defending your abuser? But it's because they don't have their own sense of self anymore. They literally have relinquished their identity to someone else. So akin to, we have our realities, like you, Clint, there, you have your reality and I have mine here. And it's like, I literally step into yours and I live for you. I don't live for me anymore.
Your whole identity becomes subsumed in the other person. You lose your sense of self.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to break away from it.
Every feeling, every experience. Now, does that sound familiar to the life you lived in church?
When we return from the break in the second half of this conversation with my very good friend from Canada, Stacie Rae, we're going to get more into this issue of narcissism. We're going to ask the question, is the God of the Bible a narcissist? And what does that mean for those of us who are perhaps contemplating or who have already begun to deconstruct our former Christian faith? And then we're going to look at issues of recovering. We're going to go deeper into this issue of narcissism, surviving narcissistic relationships, and what happens when you get out on the back end. So this is a really helpful, informative conversation. I think that a lot of you are going to benefit from. Just want to let you know before we get into the second half with Stacie, what's coming up here in the next few episodes. I've done a lot of recordings the last few weeks. I've spoken with Rachel Bernstein. This is the episode that's coming up next. Her new book is called Restart and Restore, a journal for survivors of manipulation. And it's all about walking away from abusive, high control religions and cults. This is a very helpful episode, and it kind of goes along with this conversation with Stacie, talking about how to recover, how to rebuild your life after leaving an abusive or controlling situation. And then we're going to keep that theme going. I spoke with Catherine Spearing. She's just come out with a book in October. It's called 1,000 Tiny Paper Cuts, The Subtle, Insidious Nature of Spiritual Abuse and Life on the Other Side, kind of going along with this theme of surviving abuse, whether it's a narcissistic relationship, a cult, or a high control religious group. And we're going to talk with Catherine about that. This is another fascinating book. And then finally, speaking of fascinating stories, I spoke with Brant Burleson. He's out of Houston, Texas, and he used to work in the Israeli consulate there in Houston. And the story he's got to tell is literally almost unbelievable, but it is a true story. Essentially, as he worked out of the Israeli consulate there in Houston, they were running more or less a psyops operation on these big mega churches, mega church pastors there in the Southwest, Texas, Louisiana, places like that, getting people to support the state of Israel, basically using Christian nationalism, Christian Zionism as a motivator, as a driver to get these people to support, like I said, blindly, really, the state of Israel, regardless of whatever they're doing. And of course, now we see what's going on in Gaza, Palestine, and this is all part of this story. So you are not going to want to miss that conversation with Brant. And then just a last couple of pieces of information. I'm working on setting up a recording with my very good friends, Troy and Brian from Australia. They, of course, ran the I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist podcast for a number of years. And the news is that they are going to stop. They're packing it in. They may have actually already stopped the show now. So this is going to be probably one of the last, if not the final interview with these two guys from Australia. So I'm really looking forward to reconnecting with Troy and Brian. And then also I'm going to mention my book, Not So Shiny, Not So Happy People, How Bill Gothard, Church and Family Taught Me Christianity Doesn't Work, is available on Amazon as a paperback, as a Kindle, as well as the version I did, the narrated Audible version. You can catch my chat with Frank Schaefer on his show. That's just come out on the podcast. I just got an email from his publicist, Ernie, today as I'm doing this recording now. You can catch In Conversation with Frank Schaefer. We spent a little over an hour dissecting my book, really going through it thoroughly. That was a great conversation with Frank on his show. So you can check that out either on his YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it might be, if you want to find out more information about my book. And Frank and I really dug into it, had a great talk. So you can look for that on Frank's show. And then I'm going to mention too, finally, we had a really good chat last month with Sinane Shea. This was our Dismantling Doctrine podcast Zoom call. She came back as a returning guest. And that episode just dropped the other day, that podcast that we did, taking off the tinfoil hat, talking about Christianity and conspiracy theories. So we took a really deep dive into the subject, which absolutely seems to plague evangelicalism. This issue of conspiracy theories is absolutely baked in. And then in the month of November, I'm working to get Kelsey McGinnis and Marissa Burt back as my guests for this month's DDP Zoom call. And I think that conversation is either going to be the 9th of November or the 16th. We're working to nail that date down right now. They, of course, are the authors of the book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. That podcast just dropped last month. Really great conversation, super informative. So if you want to meet these two women and have a conversation with them about their book, that will be coming up. And like I said, we'll get the date out as soon as possible. We're just looking to nail that down right now. But they are going to be our guests on the last DDP Zoom call of 2025. And the way to get access to those calls is to be a Patreon supporter of the show. And as always, the links to that are in the show notes. So look for that call coming up with Kelsey and Marissa, talking about their new book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. All right, let's get on back into the conversation with Stacie Rae. We're going to keep diving into this issue of narcissism. And the first question I want to ask Stacie is, the God of the Bible, is he a narcissist? So stay tuned for part 2 coming up right now. I was just gonna say, yeah, we got to get into the religious piece because we said in evangelicalism, you realize, and maybe I realized it too, the God of the Bible is very narcissistic. Can you spin that out? How does that actually work in the context of the evangelical church?
That's like a super dangerous.
It is,
Okay.
but there's no issues here. We could talk about whatever
What?
else you want.
That's true. Wow. Okay. So,
Yep. It's a safe place.
okay, well, the God of the Bible demands attention and worship. That's a big one. And that's not me saying demanding like that's how I feel. That literally in the scripture, right?
Oh yeah, it's all over the
Extreme reactions. This is very much like one day it's like, you are my precious seed, blah, blah. And then now it's, I'm going to smite you because you didn't follow my law. So we have a very big polarity there. Inconsistent in behaviors within those extreme reactions. It's very inconsistent. It's like you don't know at what point you're going to get what emotion. And okay, let's just step back for a second. I recognize there's a lot of time between Genesis and Revelation. When they say they've written it. But if you're going to say that that's all the same God and you're going to put it together in one package, I feel like I have the right to kind of judge it based on, if that were me, this is my life. You're kind of judging me on this one package, one timeline. So that inconsistent behavior, I think I still can judge it based on the whole package because it's supposed to be one person. And if God is not fallible, then it's not like he's evolving.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that's how we were taught, at least in my seminary and Bible college tradition. The God, a quote, God of the Bible is the God that's revealed in the entire Bible. So if you pick up your typical systematic theology textbook, that's the way they say they comb the entire Bible to construct a picture of God from Genesis to Revelation. So every passage, it's just a different attribute of God. That's what we were taught. Oh, it's his justice and his mercy and his wrath and his forgiveness and his this and that. But that God is a very, like you say, a very inconsistent God. You don't know what you're going to get. You're going to get love or judgment. And then there's the thing of, I will abuse you and then I demand love and honor and respect in return after I've beaten you down. That is classic abuser behavior, isn't it?
It is, and it fits all of that protocol. If you look at any of the abusive personalities, like the DSM-5, even disorders, right? That God of the Bible fits those. And I think one of the challenges here is that, like, we never want to condemn people for what they believe, but if you're going to believe that, that's fine. But if you're going to persecute me because I don't believe that, I think I have a right to speak as to why I don't believe it and point out some of the errors that I'm seeing in your belief system. If you want to have that conversation with me, like, I will go out of my way to point that out to you. I'm not going to go down the street and start calling people names. But if you're going to have that conversation, let's have it. This isn't right. There's conditional love in the actions, but the words say it's unconditional. They don't line up. And that's very much an abusive strategy.
It is. And I wonder if there's a trauma bond thing going on there, because I was doing a podcast a few months ago. We were looking at a well-known Christian apologist defending genocide in the Old Testament, and one of the defenses, he said, well, look, the Canaanite babies that were slaughtered in Jericho and places like that, the good news is they were allowed to go straight to heaven, and you think this is a good thing because mercifully, they were allowed to go straight to heaven. So all the murdered babies in Canaan, in the land of Canaan, when the Israelites committed genocide, they got to go straight to heaven. So he's defending God on this just bizarre, fucked up, logic in air quotes.
We'll play that in today's society. How
Exactly.
does that look?
Yep. That's a war crime and everything else.
About that. Yeah.
It's the most unbelievable justification for an atrocity you can imagine. I'm doing you a favor.
Point. That's a really good point. How do you if you were to take the biblical humanity and apply that to today's humanity, would we accept it?
Absolutely. It'd be considered a war crime, a crime against humanity. You go to prison for that, hopefully.
That
So it's pretty messed
that's
up.
really difficult. And again, so just the other day, someone was asking me about Christianity. They were surprised that I had that in my history. And so when I told them why, I said I honestly just couldn't rectify how I could be nicer, how I could be better, more gracious and merciful and loving than this God of the Bible, because I couldn't stand there and watch somebody burn to death for eternity. Like I would be so just I'm distressed seeing somebody homeless on the street.
Yeah. Yeah. When your child is in pain, you want to do everything you can to alleviate the pain. You don't want to cause the pain. As parents, we want to try to rescue the child as quickly as possible and make sure they're okay. Well, I was going to ask you on kind of on a related subject, or we were talking about trauma bonding. This is something we were talking about when we were months ago when we were prepping for this podcast, and I was relating my experiences growing up, and I talk about this in my book about I called it emotional incest, where my mother was triangulation. She was relaying all this really inappropriate stuff to me about my father, and it really messed me up as a kid because it destroyed the relationship that I had with my dad. It poisoned that relationship. But when I read this book, I think it's by Carnes about betrayal bond, he talks about sexual incest. Now, it's like I said, well, I wasn't sexually abused by my mother. It wasn't, but it was a very similar power dynamic. And one thing that struck me about it was the book, the author talks about as children, when we experience those kind of traumas, we develop coping strategies. We have to when we're betrayed and we're traumatized. And then as adults, we tend to fall into those oftentimes very unhealthy patterns. Can you kind of talk about that? How does that relate to some of your therapy work?
Well, you're right. It's a survival strategy. So we're going to have adaptive or maladaptive coping strategies. Every single person. You don't even actually need to have a very high level of trauma to have strategies to survive, because there's always something that you learn to do to get through it. Well, I guess my question would be like, first, what is it that you feel that you've experienced in terms of your strategy? Like, how did that affect you? Because okay, self-awareness, like this is such a big thing in the way that I view this. I feel like I can't even answer that fully, because it boils down to self-awareness. So I could maybe see, okay, well, this person has maybe an eating disorder of some sort, maybe too much or too less, or maybe they don't form relationships. Maybe they have a pattern of consistently making and breaking relationships. Maybe they have financial issues because they didn't learn structure in saving, because to them that was their security, was money, spending money, having things, hoarding. Like this is a huge
There's
well,
lots of
for
things. Yeah.
you. Do you know your strategies? Do you know what your coping mechanisms were coming out of that?
Well, I would say looking at it now, and especially going through the book, he talks about, okay, here's some, like you said, you listed a bunch of different things. And I didn't realize, of course, at the time that it was abuse, that I was being abused. It was a huge power dynamic. And I see that now that I go, okay, I look at it back and when I was a kid, I was just listening to my mom. And the thing about it was salacious. That was the cue. It wasn't a sexual thing. She wasn't sexually abusing me, but it was salacious gossip. So it was attractive. So I was getting sucked into it. And I see now, I think, as a grown up, I try to avoid all that with my girls. Obviously, we didn't get into any of that with them, but I became sort of like this hyper adult. I think, it was like you talked about the parent, adult child sort of thing. I became the parent. I became the adult. I suppressed my child because my child was so traumatized, and I had to rediscover, having fun and having my girls actually when they were little, having fun with them. It was like a whole eye opening experience. Like I can have fun, and I had suppressed that part of me for so long. It was kind of like, wow, so I do see that kind of spinning out. And then I think, as an adult, this is something he talks about in the book, that the consequences of those coping strategies, that's another thing I've had to work through. Some of my relational strategies haven't always been very healthy. And now I'm going, okay, now I've got another layer to work through here because I'm seeing stuff that I did to cope as a child. I'm doing it as an adult. And now that's having a negative impact on some of my interpersonal and work relationships. So that's kind kind of the level I'm at now is I'm identifying these things, and I think I'm hopefully working through them.
Yeah, because in that situation, I would think that you would actually end up feeling like you have to be an adult, wait, like you said, far before you could just be a child. But that would also lead to you. It's not just about having information. I think it's that you were probably trying to figure out, well, what does this mean? And then how does this work in terms of the relationships that this is regarding? And then now you have bias, and then now you don't understand even why you have bias. And I could see moving forward as an adult, there could be a lot of, it could go either way. It could be judgment of other people very negatively, very instantaneously, or it could be a lot of questions, wanting to know, more curiosity, getting nosy into people's business. Like there could be a lot of consequences to that you're not even feeling like that's the intention. But it's just a way that you said, well, I don't really feel safe in this situation. So if I get to know more, if I can understand more, or if I could be closer to you, but then it could go the other way. Yeah, I don't want anything to do with
Yeah.
people. Just leave me alone. This is too much. That's too much drama. I can't talk about so it's like, did you go into it like we're gonna attach, or did you want to detach and avoid, right?
Yeah, I think too, some of that is I developed this sort of like, I'm gonna become super Clint. I'm not gonna be that guy, who I'm overcompensating. It's like I'm gonna be so good at everything that nobody will be able to criticize me. So I think that was another one of my unhealthy coping strategies, was saying, I'm into a lot of different things, but I want to be the best at everything I do. I don't want to be the person that someone's going to be able to criticize behind my back, you know. So I think that was perhaps an unhealthy coping strategy as well.
Hey, that's interesting. Okay, so you were trying to not be what your mom was. Oh, wow.
Especially as a dad as well, that was a big thing, like, the tape plays in your mind. I don't wanna have her criticize me to my kids like the way my mom did to me, and tear that relationship down and burn it to the ground, and I think the bigger thing when I read the book was this idea that I didn't even know I was being abused at the time, because it was so normalized, like I say, it was salacious gossip. It was all around the context of my father was a spiritual failure. He was not a good husband. He wasn't a good father. He wasn't the good head of the household, because they, of course, bought into the whole patriarchal biblical concept of the man's the head of the household. And my dad was a very passive person, so my mom would tear him down. She was a very strong-willed woman, so she was viewing him as a complete failure. So it was, again, couched in biblical terms as well. So that was another layer that I had to work through as well. So yeah, it's pretty messed up.
It's really it's difficult because narcissism can be very, like, hidden, like, it's under the wire, and I think a lot of times, in religious concepts, I don't think you really see it until you're really invested, and so as a child, I don't think you could ever even understood that something was wrong. That was just normal, right? And then now that you get more invested in it, you see more layers, you could see how insidious it really is. But
Absolutely.
but we don't, like, if you think about it, the church down the street from you, they're good people. They're trying to do good work. I don't think that, quote, religion is bad. I think it's what's underpinning some of that, because I think that their heart is to do better and be better and serve and belong. Just like your mom, like, she wasn't, like, consciously waking up every day, like, "I'm gonna be this and say this and do this." That's literally what she grew into over time, and just created and cultivated her own belief systems and didn't even recognize it hurt anyone. And that's why I'm saying the self-awareness is so key.
Mhm.
You have self-awareness. You're like, "Okay, I don't wanna be like this anymore." That's how I know you're not a narcissist, Clint.
Oh, that's good.
Because you have self-awareness, you have self-accountability, and consistently, you're operating in it.
Yeah, I'm hopefully learning, growing, and all this kind of thing, and going through it with my sister, because it's a good point of discussion, because we can obviously talk about our childhood and compare horror stories and all that. Well, I know you've got to go. You probably have another client coming in. Just really, really quickly, what are some kind of tips you can give us? I mean, what are the best things? Let's say this person who just realizes, okay, I think I'm in an unhealthy narcissistic relationship. What do I do? How do I get help? What are some of the good coping strategies? I know that's a big question. What are some of the best sort of resources you could lay on us?
Okay, well, some of it, so we talk about self-awareness, that you wanna know, like, what's mine and what's yours. So it sounds to me like when it comes to when we're looking at narcissism in religious settings, we're going, okay, this is my stuff. Like I was triggered here, but then you can easily see this is your stuff. Same with relationships. And one of the ways is to understand some simplicities and they sound kind of like big topics, but they're very simple. So gaslighting happens in every form of narcissism. Gaslighting people, I'm sure you've seen it like spoken about kind of like random and like overly used. The gaslighting is actually one of the main control techniques. And it ain't gonna have it is, and it's used everywhere. Like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yep, absolutely.
So self-awareness will have you go, oh, I do that. But then you can also go, oh yeah, you're doing that. That's a big one. So you could be empowered with gaslighting. So for your audience, for anybody who doesn't know what gaslighting is, it comes from a 1938 play that was done by Patrick Hamilton. And so in this play, he had these two characters, Jack and Bella. And these two characters were living in a house. They're in this kind of new relationship. They move in, and Jack is, I'm giving you the short version. He's like kind of like a mobster. So he has this whole other life that Bella doesn't know about. And he figures out there must be diamonds, like gems, inside the house that they're living in, and he wants to find them. And he's moving furniture around and he's like turning the lights up and down. Now, in 1938, these are gas-powered lights. Okay, so that's where the
Gas lights, yeah.
yeah. So he's like turning the lights down because he wants to do his business, but he doesn't want her to know anything's going on. So he's essentially trying to make her think she's crazy. So when she's like, hey, is it like darker in here? He's like, no, you're crazy. I think you're just tired, dear. I think you've just had too much to drink. Like, so that's where the term that's where it was coined. Okay. If I could give your viewers ways to see, is this narcissism? Well, one of them is gaslighting. So there's 8 Ds of gaslighting. This is what I've kind of determined. We have denial. Like, I never said that. That's just straight out denial. Deflection. I'm going to shift the blame. That's your issue. That's not mine. Just shift it. Get it off. Deflect. Then we have doubt. Are you sure? Just like Patrick Hamilton's play. Are you sure? I think you might be thinking of that wrong. Diversion, bringing up the past or bringing up past conflicts, just trying to divert the attention, maybe even change the topic. Like, hey, by the way, did you grab the so-and-so from the store? Did you get that? Diversion is a really like subtle one. Like lots of people don't catch that. Diminishing, so overreacting, saying you're too sensitive, that's a classic gaslighting strategy. Discrediting, so undermining your credibility and saying like, listen, nobody sees it that way. You're the only one here who has this problem. Devaluing, so that's just basic criticism, just basic like you're so fat, you're so lazy. And then the last one is distorting. That's just distorting the truth, just saying that's not what I said. What I said was. And so we know we could see that in our interpersonal relationships. We can see that in religious organizations. We could see that in professions, that these techniques, the 8 Ds of gaslighting, are absolutely alive and well. And if you understand them, you can then look at that and say, does this person consistently do this to me? Does this person consistently diminish my feelings, minimize my feelings? Then you can go, okay, I have like one little checkbox. And it's literally taking these techniques and watching for the consistency. Because I'll be real with you, Clint, we all have narcissism in us. It's actually something that at like in your toddler years, you're designed to have. You're designed to be narcissistic as a child so that you understand this is who I am. The world is about me. And then you know what you need and you know how to take it. But then you're supposed to then learn how to share. And you're supposed to learn how to have empathy. And so we all have the behaviors, but that's the difference between a disorder and the behaviors, right? So I hope that helps with a little bit. It's such a big topic. And like John Rowing, like throw that into religion, like what you're doing, like it's not just a big topic, but you're actually coming on a sensitive, like you're poking a bear. That was one of the things that we talked about. I was like, do I want to be involved in this? Because you're poking a very big bear.
It's true. Yeah, but so far the bear hasn't poked back other than on social media. I get ripped on threads and places like that, but I don't mind engaging with people. I think it's kind of ironic and funny in the sad way when people come at me. And I had a friend, I'd talked about this on another podcast. We went to high school together. We had a high school reunion this summer. I wasn't able to go because it was in the States, but she somehow found out that I was, I guess, an atheist or agnostic. She wrote me this just horrible saying, I'm going to hell, and I'm a fool, and I'm lost, and I'm arrogant, and I'm this and that and the other thing, and all your education means nothing. You become an educated fool. And, I hope you repent before it's too late, and you're gonna end up in the flames of hell. And just rip me to shreds. I thought, God, she doesn't know anything about me other than the fact that I'm not a Christian anymore. So, it's
You have the same thing, Nazrin. It is what it is. There's nothing you can do about it. And what I find is that those are people that they've anchored to an expected outcome, but they don't actually understand what it is they're in. So they just have a belief based on, this is what I feel right now, and this is what I've been promised. And so I can't let go of that because I've been promised eternal life. I've been promised that I'm going to be okay when I die. And so that fear just locks them right in. And that's part of the idealization that we talk about. You're promised these beautiful things. That's future faking.
sure. It sounds great. So we'd love to believe it was all true, but we've given it up, unfortunately. Well, I know you got to go. You probably got another client coming. Just really quickly, that how can people get a hold of you if they said, okay, I want to talk with you more, maybe get involved with your therapy, your counseling? How can people find you on social media? What's the best way?
Okay, well, if you want to get the book, the current one, The Last Letter, this one you can find on Amazon across the country, across the world. thelastletter.ca. You can visit that website as well. Otherwise, it's www.houseofrae.org. And that's where my main website is. I'm on Facebook, and mostly Facebook. I find that that's my biggest platform. TikTok, and it's just Stacie Rae.
Yeah,
And
that's
for
RAE, not RAY.
RAE, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Make sure we get that right.
head to the website. You can find all the links to that. But yeah, if somebody's out there and they just feel like you don't really know who you are, and you're trying to unravel all of these lies that have kind of maybe muddied up your purpose and your identity, absolutely give me a call and we'll see what we can do.
All right. Well, listen, I don't know how, let's see, it's been since 2018. That's crazy. We cannot go this long again, Stacie, but
Okay.
I've absolutely loved reconnecting with you. I know you've changed so much. I've changed so much. There's been so many things that have gone on since we last talked and met in Seattle, but let's not do another 5, 6, 7 years. Please, let's touch base again. So thank you so much.
Most welcome. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.